They said he could freeze hell itself with just one look. Min Jae Park had a reputation that preceded him like winter's first breath, cold and unforgiving. Seoul's most ruthless businessman, the man who had built an empire from his father's ashes and his own calculated brilliance. His office sat at the very top of the city's most imposing skyscraper, all glass and steel and brutal elegance, much like the man himself. 23 secretaries in 18 months. That was his record. Some quit after a single day. Others made it to a week before their nerves shattered. The reasons were always the same. His silence was suffocating. His expectations were impossible. And those eyes, dark and sharp as obsidian blades, saw through every weakness, every hesitation, every tiny human flaw. Min Jae never apologized for who he was. In his world, mercy was currency wasted, and warmth was a liability he couldn't afford. He worked 16-hour days without breaking, made decisions worth billions before most people finished their morning coffee, and treated emotions like defects to be eliminated. His employees feared him. His competitors respected him. No one truly knew him, and that was exactly how he wanted it. So when Human Resources sent yet another replacement, Min Jae didn't even bother to look up from the acquisition documents spread across his desk. He could already imagine her, trembling hands, downcast eyes, voice stammering through attempted pleasantries. They were all the same, these fragile people who thought they could survive in his orbit. They never lasted. He would give this one 3 days, maybe 4 if she was particularly stubborn. "Your last secretary," he said, his voice cutting through the silence like a knife through silk, "made the mistake of thinking I wanted conversation. You don't. I want efficiency, accuracy, and above all silence. Do you understand?" He still hadn't looked up, his pen moving across the page in quick, decisive strokes. "I understand completely, Mr. Park." The voice that answered him was different. It didn't shake. It didn't waver. It was rich and warm, with a melodic quality that seemed utterly out of place in his frozen domain, yet somehow managed to command the space rather than shrink from it. Min Jae's pen stopped moving. The silence that followed was heavy with something he rarely felt. Curiosity. Slowly, deliberately, he lifted his gaze. She stood before his desk with a kind of poise that couldn't be taught, only earned. Her name, according to the file he'd barely glanced at, was Zuri Okonkwo. African descent, educated at international business schools, fluent in 5 languages, references that were impeccable but told him nothing about the woman herself. She wore a tailored charcoal suit that spoke of professionalism without pretense, and her natural hair was styled in an elegant updo that framed her face beautifully. But it was her eyes that stopped his breath for just a fraction of a second. Deep brown, intelligent, unwavering. They met his directly, not in challenge but in simple, steady acknowledgement. She was looking at him, truly looking at him, not through him or away from him, but directly into him as if she could see past the armor to the man beneath. No one looked at Min Jae like that. Ever. The air between them shifted, charged with something electric and unnameable. This was the beginning, the first crack in foundations he'd thought were unshakable. He should have recognized the danger right then. Instead, he decided to test her, to push until she broke like all the others. It was what he did. It was who he was. He pulled a file from his drawer and slid it across the desk with deliberate slowness. The Chen Corporation merger. The numbers don't add up. I need to know why, and I need concrete evidence. Don't come back until you have answers. It was an assignment designed to take days. A labyrinth of financial data and international transactions that would overwhelm even experienced analysts. Zuri picked up the file, her long fingers steady, her expression calm. She gave a single nod, precise and professional. "Understood, Mr. Park." Then she turned and walked out of his office, her heels clicking a confident rhythm against the marble floor. Min Jae returned to his work, dismissing her from his mind. She'd be back in a few hours, flustered and making excuses, or perhaps she wouldn't return at all. Either way, he'd proven his point. His world had no room for the unprepared. 2 hours later, his intercom buzzed. "Mr. Park, I have the information you requested." Her voice again that steady calm. He glanced at his watch, frowning. Impossible. He'd expected days. Come in. Zuri entered and placed the file on his desk, now marked with color-coded tabs. The discrepancy is in the subsidiary transactions, specifically the third quarter reports from their Jakarta branch. They've been inflating their asset values by routing transactions through a shell company in Singapore. I've cross-referenced the dates with international banking regulations and found the paper trail. Pages 12 through 17 have the evidence you need, including the company registration numbers that don't match their claimed business operations. Min-jae stared at the file, then at her. That unwinding sensation in his chest came again, tighter this time. She hadn't just found the problem. She'd dissected it with surgical precision. He felt something he hadn't experienced in years, genuine surprise mixed with an uncomfortable flutter of respect. He gave her another task without comment, harder this time, involving encrypted communications from a rival firm. She completed it before the lunch hour. He threw a third assignment at her, one that required understanding the complex web of Seoul's underground business networks. She had it on his desk by late afternoon. Her analysis so thorough it included information even his own intelligence team had missed. By the time the sun began its descent, painting the Han River in shades of amber and rose, Min-jae found himself watching her more than his work. Who was this woman who moved through his impossible demands as if they were simple errands? She never complained, never. Peak instead. Asked for praise. Never showed even a flicker of the fear he inspired in everyone else. She was extraordinary, and it infuriated him in ways he couldn't quite name. The office slowly emptied as evening fell. The other employees fled gratefully, but Zuri remained at her desk just outside his door, still working, still present. Min-jae stood by his window, staring out at the glittering city below. His jaw clenched so tight it ached. The Kwon deal was falling apart. 3 months of negotiations crumbling because the other party had decided to play games, to test his resolve, to see if the great Min-jae Park could be humiliated. Millions were at stake, yes, but more than that, his reputation was bleeding out. In his world, perception was everything. Show weakness once, and the predators would circle. His hands gripped the window frame, knuckles pale with tension. He could feel the rage building under his skin, cold and controlled but no less destructive for its temperature. Failure was not an option he accepted. You're still here. He didn't turn around, but he'd sensed her approach, felt the subtle shift in the air that announced her presence. Zuri stood a respectful distance behind him, holding a cup of tea. Green tea, he noticed, not coffee. She'd paid attention to what he drank. The Kwon situation, she said quietly. It's not really about the contract terms, is it? His breath caught. How could she possibly know? He'd told no one the real nature of the problem. What do you think you know? His voice was low, dangerous, a warning that would have sent anyone else running. She didn't run. Instead, she moved closer, setting the tea down on the glass side table. They're testing you publicly. Refusing reasonable terms not because they're inadequate, but because they want to demonstrate they can make you negotiate twice. It's theater for the other companies watching. If you bend, you'll spend the next year defending your position from every direction. Min-jae turned slowly, his dark eyes finding hers in the dim light. She'd cut straight through weeks of complex posturing to the brutal core truth. More than that, she understood the unspoken rules of his world, the savage politics that happened in shadows and silence. The distance between them felt suddenly charged, intimate despite the professional setting. He could smell her perfume now, something subtle with notes of coconut and jasmine, warm and completely at odds with the cold glass and steel around them. And what, he asked, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper, would you suggest I do? Zuri held his gaze, unflinching. She took one more step, close enough now that he could see the gold flecks in her brown eyes, could see the steady pulse at her throat that betrayed she wasn't quite as calm as she appeared. You don't negotiate further. You demonstrate power somewhere else. Find what Kwon values more than his pride. Not his company, something personal. His art collection, his vintage wine cellar, his family's historical estate. You acquire it through a third party, quietly. Then you let him discover you own it. He'll come back to the table on your terms, and every other company will see that challenging you has consequences. It was brilliant. It was ruthless. It was exactly what he would have done himself if he hadn't been too close to the situation to see it clearly. A slow smile touched Min-jae's lips, the first genuine expression of pleasure he'd felt in months. It wasn't a kind smile, but it was real, and it transformed his severe face into something almost devastatingly attractive. He closed the remaining distance between them until he could feel the warmth radiating from her body, until the space they occupied felt more private than any room he'd ever been in. "Who are you, Zuri?" The question came out rough, almost tender, her name on his tongue feeling more intimate than any touch. She looked up at him, and for the first time, her composure cracked just slightly, revealing a spark of something fierce and bright beneath. "I'm the one who's staying, Mr. Park." In that moment, standing in his darkened office with the city lights spread below them like fallen stars, Min-jae felt his carefully constructed world tilt on its axis. This woman, with her steady voice and seeing eyes, had breached his defenses without even trying. The game had fundamentally changed, and he was no longer the only one holding the pieces. After that night, everything shifted in ways both subtle and profound. Min-jae found himself trusting Zuri with secrets that could destroy empires. He showed her the hidden accounts, the encrypted files, the real power structures that existed beneath the corporate facades. She became more than his secretary. She became his strategist, his confidant, the person who understood not just his business but his mind. Their working relationship evolved into something that felt dangerously close to partnership. He would find himself staying later just to have another 20 minutes of conversation with her. They would debate strategies long after decisions had been made, not because they needed to, but because he craved the way her mind moved, quick and sharp and fearless. One evening, as rain hammered against the windows and lightning split the sky, they were finalizing a merger that would absorb a smaller company. The documents were spread across his desk like a paper battlefield. "We should protect their pension fund," Zuri said, her pen hovering over a clause. "It's the right thing to do." Min-jae leaned back in his chair, studying her profile. "Sentiment is expensive. In this business, it can destroy you." She looked up then, her eyes finding his with that penetrating directness he'd come to both dread and crave. "Is that what you actually believe, or is it just what you learned to survive?" The question hung between them like lightning looking for ground. It was the first time anyone had dared to ask about the person he'd been before he became this. He should have shut her down. Every instinct screamed at him to reinforce the walls. But something in her gaze, something gentle and fierce all at once, made him silence. "My father," he began, his voice low and careful, "built everything on one principle. Trust is weakness. He loved a woman once, loved her completely. She used that love to try to take his company, his reputation, everything he'd built. I watched it happen. I was 15. I watched him construct walls so high around his heart that nothing could reach him anymore. Not joy, not hope, not even sunlight." He paused, his jaw tightening. "He died alone inside those walls. At the time I thought it was the price of strength. Better to be alone than betrayed." The rain filled the silence that followed. Zuri didn't offer empty comfort or false reassurance. Instead, she gave him something more valuable, a piece of herself in return. "My parents were the opposite," she said softly. "They trusted everyone. They were warm, generous, they believed in the goodness of people. When their business failed, every single person they'd helped disappeared. They lost everything and it broke something in them. I was young, but I remember watching my mother cry over empty bank statements and my father's hands shake as he tried to explain why we were losing our home." She smiled, sad and knowing. "I promised myself I'd never be that vulnerable. But I also promised I'd never become so hard that I couldn't tell the difference between an enemy and someone worth fighting for." In that moment, the last pretense of distance dissolved. They were just two people scarred by the same lesson, taught from opposite directions, finding unexpected recognition in each other. The tension that had been building between them found new depth, shifting from professional respect into something far more dangerous: understanding. And with understanding came heat. It started manifesting in ways that made Min-jae's carefully controlled world feel unstable. The brush of her fingers when she handed him documents would send electricity up his arm, making him lose his train of thought. A glance across the boardroom during tense negotiations would last a heartbeat too long, a silent conversation happening beneath the surface that shut out everyone else. He caught himself watching the way she bit her lower lip when she was concentrating, and something possessive and primal would stir in his chest. The air around them felt constantly charged, a storm waiting for any excuse to break. The breaking point came from violence. Min-jae's enemies were numerous, and one in particular had been humiliated by the Kwon situation. Revenge was inevitable. It came on a Wednesday evening as his car pulled away from the building. Zuri was walking to her own car in the parking structure when she saw it, a motorcycle with no plates sliding from the shadows behind Min-jae's vehicle, the rider's hand reaching into his jacket. Instinct screamed at her, louder than logic, louder than self-preservation. She didn't think. She reacted. Her car roared to life, tires screeching as she accelerated directly into the motorcycle's path. The rider swerved, lost control, went down hard on the concrete. His weapon skittered away into darkness. Security descended within seconds, but Zuri sat in her car, hands shaking on the wheel, adrenaline making her vision swim. Then her door was wrenched open, and Min-jae was there. His face a mask of fury barely containing terror. "What were you thinking?" His voice was rough, almost breaking. "You could have been killed, Zuri. Do you understand that? He was going to shoot you." She shouted back, her body trembling. "Did you expect me to just watch?" The raw truth of her words, the reckless bravery of her actions, shattered the last of his control. All the fear, all the fury, all the weeks of denying what he felt for her exploded inside him. He pulled her from the car in one motion, his hands framing her face with a gentleness that contradicted the intensity in his eyes. He looked at her for one suspended moment, asking a silent question. Then he kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It was claiming and desperate and full of every word they'd never said. It was passion and terror and overwhelming need. Zuri froze for a single heartbeat before her hands fisted in his coat, pulling him closer, kissing him back with equal fire. The world around them, the security teams, the flashing lights, everything faded into meaningless noise. There was only this, only them, only the truth they'd both been fighting. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "No one," he whispered, his voice wrecked with emotion, "has ever put themselves in danger for me. No one." That night changed everything. Their relationship became a secret paradise, a hidden world of stolen moments within his dangerous life. Passionate kisses in the private elevator. His hand at the small of her back in crowded rooms promising so much more. Late nights in his office transformed from work sessions into discoveries of each other. He learned the sound of her laughter, the feel of her skin, the way she sighed when he kissed the curve of her neck. She discovered the tender way he'd tuck her hair behind her ear, the reverence in his touch that contradicted everything the world thought they knew about him. They built something extraordinary in the shadows, a brilliant light that burned between them even as they maintained the facade of professionalism. It was dangerous and intoxicating and absolutely necessary. In a life built on cold calculation, she had become his warmth, his center, his reason. Months passed, and Min-jae realized something that both terrified and exhilarated him. He couldn't imagine his life without her. Not for a day, not for an hour. The thought of losing her created a hollow ache in his chest that no amount of success could fill. His love for her was the most powerful force he'd ever encountered, stronger than ambition, deeper than fear. It was foundational, essential, the truth upon which he wanted to build everything else. Marriage had always seemed like weakness to him, a sentimental trap. Now it felt like the most important decision he would ever make. He wanted the world to know she was his. More than that, he wanted her to know she was his forever, and he was hers completely. He began planning with the same meticulous attention he gave to billion-dollar deals. The location he chose was Jeju Island, a private villa overlooking the ocean, surrounded by camellia flowers and volcanic stone, breathtakingly beautiful and utterly secluded. He arranged everything. A private chef, traditional Korean musicians, a sunset that promised to set the sky on fire. The ring he commissioned was a flawless diamond surrounded by sapphires, chosen not for its price but because the deep blue stones reminded him of the ocean in her eyes when she laughed. He practiced the words alone in his penthouse. "Will you marry me?" They felt strange, vulnerable, more terrifying than any business negotiation he'd ever conducted. For the first time in his adult life, he was stepping into something he couldn't control, and the stakes were everything that mattered. The day arrived wrapped in golden sunlight and ocean breeze. They flew to Jeju, and the villa was perfect, all traditional architecture and modern luxury. As evening approached, Min-jae led Zuri to the terrace overlooking the sea. Candles flickered in glass holders. Flowers perfumed the air. His heart hammered against his ribs like it was trying to escape. But Zuri had always been able to read him. She'd felt his nervous energy all day, seen the way he kept checking details, the unusual softness in his eyes when he looked at her. She knew this man, knew the weight of his past, knew what it cost him to choose vulnerability. Standing at the stone wall watching waves crash against black volcanic rocks far below, she saw the tension in his shoulders, the hope and fear warring in his expression. She understood what was coming, and her heart swelled with overwhelming love. They'd walked such a long, difficult path together. They'd proven themselves to each other in ways most people never would. It was time to build something that went beyond survival, beyond secrets. It was time to claim their future. She turned to him and took his hand, threading her fingers through his. The touch steadied him, and his eyes met hers, dark and vulnerable and achingly hopeful. "Min-jae," she said, her voice carrying over the sound of the ocean, soft but clear. She smiled, beautiful and knowing, holding a universe of understanding in her expression. "Since it's long enough," she whispered, her gaze locked with his. "Why not go even deeper?" The world stopped. Her words, the echo of his own secret thoughts, weren't a question. They were an answer. They were an invitation to a forever he'd been too afraid to name. She wasn't just accepting what he was offering. She was demanding more, a deeper connection, a partnership that would transcend everything else. She was talking about their souls. All his nervousness evaporated, replaced by absolute certainty. He understood her completely. He raised her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles, never breaking eye contact. "You've always been ahead of me," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Then he reached into his pocket and lowered himself to one knee on the warm stone. The sight of Min-jae, the most powerful man she knew, on his knees before her offering not a command but a plea, was the most powerful thing she'd ever witnessed. He opened the velvet box. The diamond caught the dying sun, exploding in brilliant fire. "Zuri," he said, his voice strong now, filled with everything he felt. "You saw me when everyone else only saw the monster I'd become. You walked into my darkness and became my light. I don't just want you as my wife. I want you as my partner in everything, my equal in all ways, my forever. Will you marry me? Will you build this life with me?" Tears streamed down her face as she looked from the ring to the love blazing in his eyes. "Yes," she breathed, the word a sacred promise. "Yes, Min-jae. To everything. To the partnership, to forever, to going deeper than I ever imagined possible." He slid the ring onto her finger where it belonged, then rose and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a tenderness that held every lonely night he'd endured and every beautiful dawn they would share. It was a kiss of forever, a seal on their vows. They held each other as the sun finally surrendered to the horizon, painting the sky in spectacular shades of amber and rose and violet. The dangerous path was behind them. Ahead lay a life they would create together, a forever deeper and stronger than anything either had known before. They had started as boss and secretary, become lovers in a secret paradise, and were now partners choosing to go deeper than forever itself. If this story of fierce love and unbreakable partnership made your heart race, then subscribe to Unfold Korean Stories right now. We have so many more dramatic, passionate romances waiting for you. Hit that subscribe button and join us for stories that will make you believe in love all over again.